All right, so this week's story is called The Cabin by Nazurak Rainey Hobson. So we tried to research some of the words that are native to her language. So we're going to try our best to pronounce them correctly, but please forgive us if we mispronounce them. We're trying our best. If you know how to pronounce them, let us know. All right. Don't let the boogies get into your head, Ada. I repeated the words over and over like a mantra. Something shifted outside the cabin. Stay calm, Ada. Breathe. I grabbed my Appa's old rusted knife, left behind from an earlier trip. It wobbled much heavier than my own knife as I tried to find a good grip. After my small dinner of caribou meat and a cup of melted snow, I'd packed my own knife and cooking pot in my backpack and stowed the pack in the sled outside to make my pre-dawn departure smoother. I had more wolverine traps to set on the way home and wanted to have everything ready to go. How could I have guessed some thing would come calling in the middle of the night? I wasn't afraid of wildlife, but whatever had woken me up wasn't any creature I was familiar with. I was sure of that. Crunch, crunch. The slow crushing of iced over snow echoed painfully, loudly in the still air, even muffled as it was by the wooden walls of the cabin.
I could tell by the rhythm of the footsteps that the thing walked on two legs. The dim light of my iPhone's flashlight cast weird shadows on the cabin's textured walls. I scanned the dark space, searching for anything else I could wield as a weapon, but nothing. Crunch, crunch. It couldn't be a person. During deep winter in that vast Arctic wild, people didn't walk around in the middle of the night. People didn't travel at night at all, really, unless it was an emergency. And in that case, they would call out and ask to use the emergency beacon to summon help. No other hunters were down here that I knew of, and I was the only one with a trapping line this far south, 40 miles from the nearest human being. My body shook with a combination of restrained breathing and adrenaline. Whatever was out there was making its way to the back side of the cabin. There was a single small window there, the size of a laptop screen. If the creature passed by it, I might be able to get a look. I lifted Appa's knife, readying myself. I gritted my teeth and flexed my fingers, chiding myself for also leaving my rifle outside the cabin door. But it was well below zero, and since there are no fear of bears this late in the season, I'd left the rifle outside to prevent water from condensing on its surface. Such condensation requires significant time to dry thoroughly, or you risked a misfire. Crunch, crunch. The footsteps sounded lighter than an adult's, more like how a child's steps sounded in the snow. What was this thing? I turned slowly, always keeping the sound of the crunching snow in front of me.
Then the footsteps stopped. Something clanked, and I heard the creature wiggle the handle of the abandoned cast iron stove that sat weed and snow covered on the east side of the cabin. More sounds. Wax paper crinkling, then a bundle being picked up and set back down. The creature had rejected my stash of leftover frozen caribou meat. No Arctic predator would pass up the chance for free food, even if it was full from an earlier meal. It would take the frozen meat and bury it somewhere for later. If it was an herbivore, it would not be examining anything that smelled of humans and blood and would definitely be part of a herd or group and not alone. What was this thing? Come on, I thought, passed by the window. More crunching, and this time I heard the metallic scrapes and clangs of one of my caribou traps being moved. The creature was strong then. My shoulders still ached from carrying and setting the traps all day. The trap banged again, sparking a memory from yesterday, something I dismissed as insignificant.
Oh, sorry.
I'd set up 3 bucket traps that afternoon after placing the second one, which I attached to a large window right where the black spruce trees met the rolling tundra. I'd taken a bit longer to disguise the trap after setting it. Wolverines, in addition to being incredibly fierce and violent, are also very smart. If they sense a trap, they can snag the bait, smears of rancid bear fat without getting caught, so disguise is crucial. As I brushed the smooth snow around the trap site, arranging loose sticks to point the animal in the direction I wanted, I saw movement from the corner of my eye.
I turned to see a short, dark figure dart behind a tree about 100 yards away. As I pulled my rifle from my snow machine and raised it, I whistled loudly, like my Appa had taught me. An animal would poke its head out to investigate the odd noise. When nothing moved, I yelled a quick, "Hey!" Still nothing. Strapping the rifle across my chest, I hopped on my snow machine. The sound of the vehicle should have made an animal run from the tree, but nothing emerged. I drove off to the side, hoping to get a better view over whatever it was, and at the same time putting a little more distance between us. To my surprise, the space behind the tree was empty. Thoroughly creeped out, I set off down the frozen river toward the cabin, throwing uneasy glances behind me, eager to put miles between me and whatever it was. But as soon as I was settled in the cabin, I had dismissed the sighting as I had been taught to do. If you run into anything odd in the Arctic wilderness, the elders said, leave it alone. The trap outside banged again. Was it the same creature I'd glimpsed yesterday? Had it followed me here? Was it watching me? Was it hunting? My pulse surged, heartbeat drumming in my ears as I prepared for the thing to move again, to pass the window. But no footsteps came. It was taking its time, examining everything along the cabin walls. Could it be looking for a way in? I shook my head, remembering the advice of the elders. Ignore it. No matter what you see or what you hear, just ignore it. Whistling? Ignore it. Distant chatter that drifts in and out of hearing? Ignore it.
Footprints that are moose-like but definitely not moose, ignore them. Weird glowing lights humming along the mountain ridge, definitely ignore that. Arctic winters are mostly filled with darkness, and we all grew up hearing stories of the scary things that go bump in the almost 24-hour-long night. Boogies, as my appa called them. The little people with 10 times the strength of humans that still hated the Inupiaq tribe from a war lost hundreds of years ago. The willow people that hid in tall bushes and stole items or family members from you as you passed through dense brush. Spirits that came down from the sky that looked like northern lights and removed your head for foot games. Sometimes hunters would come back with tales of incredible encounters with beings that they'd barely evaded, and sometimes hunters just disappeared, never to be heard of again. These stories were told half for fun and half as a warning, but the warning wasn't really about supernatural beings. The moral of every story was that you should never panic, because panicking could expose you to real dangers, like extreme cold, falling into water, or becoming vulnerable to known predators. Most of the battle of thriving in the Arctic was fighting the thoughts and fears in your own head. So yeah, I'd heard the stories, but I never thought they might actually be true. You could go a little insane if you thought about some of the odd stuff too much. I relaxed my grip on Appa's knife. There had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the thing prowling around outside was just an especially fat weasel, or a wolf pup that walked funny and wasn't hungry. Right. Except the weasels aren't that heavy and they love caribou meat. And it wasn't wolf pup season, and all of last year's pups would have been nearly grown, their bodies too heavy to make the light footsteps outside.
I glanced at the personal locator beacon sitting next to a flashlight on the small table by the bed platform. The bright green plastic glowed, outlining the shape of the device. My iPhone didn't get service this far out in the boonies, but I could see off the PLB alerting the search and rescue people that I needed help. But as far out as I was, it would take a few hours for anyone to arrive, and by then, whatever it was could be long gone, and I would have to explain to a group of tired and angry volunteers why I called for help in the middle of the night when I didn't even know what the thing outside was. No, not the PLB. Not yet, anyway. This was only the second time my appa had let me travel by myself, and I couldn't disappoint him. Not many women trapped fur-bearing animals in the Arctic, and an even smaller number of teenage girls trapped, maybe one or two across the whole region every other generation. My male cousins had complained about a girl taking over this part of my appa's trap line, though they clearly thought it would be only a temporary phase, like that year I had bright blue hair. But I loved trapping and I loved a challenge, and I knew I had what it took to be a trapper full time. Ever since I was 5 years old, and my appa taught me how to snare ptarmigans by predicting how they behaved, I was hooked. I'd spent the last 12 years learning the languages of trapping and animal behavior, and I never shied away from all the back-breaking labor trapping entailed. Appa had been happy to teach me. Inseparable since I was born. We were so alike, even down to the way we stood with one hip cocked and our arms crossed.
When I got old enough, I asked for camping gear and vehicles instead of Barbies and dresses. I could almost hear my appa now. Don't let the boogies get into your head, Ada. And always said the words in a quiet, measured tone, the one he used when I needed to take what he was teaching seriously. His warning in my head, I gripped his too big knife tightly in my right hand and made my way back to the back of the cabin. If the creature wouldn't come to the window, I'd have to look out at it. I'd studied animal behavior my whole life. If I knew what this thing was, it would no longer be a nameless boogie. I could predict what it would do and make a plan. I grabbed the flashlight off the table on the way. My iPhone battery wouldn't last much longer. Plus, the flashlight would illuminate much more of the area. I crouched in the front of the back window, slowing my breath to calm down like my appa had taught me to do before I took a long-distance shot with a rifle. The footsteps started again, shuffling around the northwest corner. Any second, the thing would be in plain view from the window. As soon as the snow crunched beneath the glass, I flicked on the flashlight and held it to the window. The bright LED flooded the snow outside with light. I blinked. There was nothing there. No creature and no tracks. Nothing but clean, undisturbed snow. Before I could process what that meant, shuffling sounds came from the opposite side of the cabin, near the front door. Something shifted its weight in the snow from foot to foot.
How had it moved so quickly and without leaving any tracks? Everything leaves tracks. Everything. I could hear the weight of this thing breaking through the surface of the snow. Cursing under my breath, I made my way to the center of the cabin again, holding the knife in front of me. If the creature hadn't already known I was in here, awake and aware of its presence, it definitely knew now. Quietly, I crept to the front door, which I'd suddenly remembered was only secured with the rope loop. The bare latch, a long piece of thick wood that slid into reinforced wood blocks on either side of the door, was propped against the wall. With one swift movement, I lowered the latch into place, wood scraping against wood. No sooner had I secured the latch than the door jerked inward with a thud. The thing was trying to get in. Could the creature see the foam-wrapped rifle leaning against the wall outside? Did it know what it was? With stiff, cold hands, I checked the bare latch to make sure it was secure, then backed away from the door, panic making me stumble. The door rattled again, straining against the thick wood bar. I gritted my teeth to avoid making a sound and tried to keep my focus on what was going on instead of giving in completely to panic. As I held up the knife in front of me, my other hand brushed against my pocket and the outline of my phone. With numb fingers, I unlocked it and swiped till I got the video recorder going. The ping of the app indicating I was recording echoed in the small room. The groaning of the door stopped, leaving only the sound of my breathing in the silence. I crept forward, the whispers of my thick wool socks against the plywood floor sounding impossibly loud and heavy.
I pressed my ear against the cabin door, and almost as if the creature knew what I was doing, it began moving away, crunching in the snow as it retreated into the distance. The silence stretched on, not even a breeze could be heard. If I was going to retrieve the rifle, it was now or never. I propped the phone near the door, still recording, and while my right hand gripped the knife, my left lifted the bare latch and pushed the door open just enough to slip through. The cold clawed at my bare fingers as sub-zero air flooded the cabin, but I forced them around the rifle's foam cover. As soon as the weapon was inside, I slammed the door shut and shoved the bare latch back into place. The noise triggered another sound, snow crunching, footsteps running back to the door. It rattled again, harder this time. Ignoring the stiffness in my left hand, I unzipped the rifle cover and loaded around, the freezing metal burning my frigid fingers. The white of frozen skin cells peppered the rifle's surface. My body remembered the weight and shape of the rifle, and in one smooth motion, I knelt and lifted it against my shoulder. Outside, the creature shifted its weight from one foot to the other, as if trying to decide what to do. I cocked the rifle, the metallic sounds ringing sharp and deadly in the air, and trained it on the door. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away, growing quieter and quieter as they passed into the distance. I waited a breath longer, then lowered the rifle, and noticed my phone was still recording. I picked it up and pressed the button for it to stop.
Its clock read 5:26 a.m., only an hour left before I needed to leave. That was fine. Even though my face and hands stung from the icy rifle and my muscles trembled from exhaustion, there was no way I'd be going back to sleep. I fed the stove a few small logs, adjusting the damper end vent for a slow burn. I grabbed my rifle and flicked on the safety, then wrapped my sweater carefully around it, hoping the fabric would absorb the beating moisture, and set it aside within arm's reach. Appa's knife I kept on my other side, along with the flashlight. I wrapped the sleeping bag around myself, wincing as the cold, silky lining brushed my frostbitten skin. I fished my phone from my pocket and played the video I'd recorded. There was no mistaking the heavy footsteps of the creature running up to the cabin, then backing away. And the rattling of the door was so loud I had to turn down the volume. A shiver snaked through me, and suddenly I wanted to get home immediately, maybe even leave some of my emergency winter gear behind to lighten my load and shorten the trip. It would be risky sending the snow machine in my exhausted state, unable to see the intricate details of the terrain in the total dark, but fear clawed at my mind, almost convincing me. Then Appa's voice found me again. Don't let the boogies get into your head, Ada. In the cabin, I was warm, safe, and secure, and I needed the dim half daylight to see my way home in one piece. The smartest move was to stay here a little longer. I shoved all the boogies, all the fear, and what ifs from my mind, closed my eyes, and in spite of myself, fell asleep.
An hour later, I opened the door to find the world dim with a barely visible winter sun hovering behind the mountains. I hadn't heard any strange noises in a while, whatever the thing was. I was confident that it had moved on. Now that the threat was gone, I was eager to find evidence of the creature and maybe get some pictures of its footprints to show Appa. He would know what it was, even if I was unable to identify it. Emerging into the chilly pre-dawn air, I circled the cabin, carefully examining the ground. Footprints should have shown easily. I had clearly heard the cracking of the snow last night. My phone had even captured the sounds. But there were only my own footprints, not even a depression or disturbed snow pile. Everything was clean. Even the wrapped caribou meat didn't show signs of having been moved. My unease returned, and I packed my gear quickly. Appa might scold me for packing sloppily, but he'd understand. I scarfed down a protein bar and drank cold coffee from my thermos, threw on my heavy mutton-lined parka and winter gear, and hopped on my snow machine. The 3-hour ride home was uneventful and quiet, too quiet, without even the usual movements of clumsy ptarmigan or winter-hungry rabbits. It wasn't until I rounded the end of the frozen river and glimpsed my village that the tension finally left my body. With only 100 houses or so nestled in the bottom of a wide valley surrounded by huge ancient mountains, Inaktuvuk Pass barely qualified as a village. But it was my home, and I'd never been so happy to see it.
Appa stood waiting outside our house, his tall, wide form like a mountain. He was dressed in his lightweight winter gear, a shovel in his gloved hands. Neat piles of snow were off to the side, and a level path now led to the front of the house from the road. His dark-skinned face broke into a wide smile as I pulled up, but then worry lines bloomed as he realized I had returned early. I rolled myself off the snow machine and involuntarily squeaked as he grabbed me and lifted me off the ground in a big bear hug. Ada, panic, you're early. His voice was muffled by my fur ruff. I laughed as I extracted myself from his arms and removed my goggles and face mask. Man, Appa, something weird happened this morning, I said as I pulled off my heavy parka, not wanting to overheat now that I was moving around. I think I ran into a boogie, a bona fide boogie. Oh, Paniga, I bet you have a story. He made an overly shocked face with wide eyes. But you came back all right, if a little early. My face warmed. I didn't get as many traps out as I'd planned, but I don't know what was out there. Didn't want to press my luck. I recorded the sound on my phone a little. Whatever it was, it didn't leave footprints. Oh, Ikani. Well, come inside and tell me and your Akka all about it. We will unpack your gear after you warm up and eat. Walking into the house, I was greeted with the warm sense of cooking yeast and sweet dough. The short, round figure of my Akka stood at the stove with her favorite spatula in her hand.
Sourdough pancakes bubbled pleasantly on the hot pan after she flipped them over expertly, the sound and smell making my stomach growl. Akka ran over, her hug enveloping me in a cloud of hot oil and hot cake batter. Aniga, so early, just in time for sourdough, though, hot from the pan. Her frizzy hair tickled my face before she ran back to the stove to tend her cooking. Sit, eat, she called over her shoulder and gestured to the steaming plate of hot cakes on the table. I shimmied free from the rest of my outside gear and left it in a pile at the door, then sat down with Appa and pulled the hot cakes towards me. 3 maple syrup drenched pancakes and 1 glass of water later, I told them of the events of this morning. When I had finished, I played them the recording on my phone. The heavy footsteps of the mysterious creature filled our small kitchen. Sounds like 2 legs for sure, Appa said as he scratched the thin stubble on his chin. But no tracks at all? Not even one, Appa. Clean snow besides my footprints. There weren't even secondary markings like on things it touched. He leaned back in his chair and grunted. He didn't doubt my ability to read snow tracks. He'd taught me himself. His dark brown eyes looked over my face for a minute. The weary lines faded a little. You did good, Ada. You didn't panic. You did what you were supposed to do. You came home safe. Proud of you, Ariga. Whoever taught you to be out there really knows what he's doing. He said the last part with a smile and a wink.
I snorted and rolled my eyes, but his words resonated in my head. After all those stories, I finally understood what Appa and the elders had been talking about. I confronted a mysterious creature last night, a boogie, but that wasn't the only kind of boogie there was. Fear and panic, self-doubt, and rash decisions. I'd known those were to be avoided, but after last night, it was suddenly clear. Those states of mind were just as much boogies as the creature kind. Abba's expression turned serious again. Maybe you can take over my trap line to the west too next year. I sat a bit taller in my chair. I confronted both kinds of boogies last night, and I knew I was more than capable of doing it again. I raised my eyebrows in a silent yes, a wide smile on my face. There would be boogies for sure, but fear wouldn't be one of them.